And I completely agree with you that we not pigeonhole ourselves as VAs to just gather. There are many, and one of those tasks, of course, is the user acceptance testing. And so I'm super excited to be able to my experience and some nuggets that you guys can take with you so that you can apply it to your job. I want to thank Jen and Steve for giving me the opportunity to speak as well today. When they reached out to me, I was super excited because one, we had just completed a UAT experience with the and so I figured that's perfect. It's the best time to be sharing what we had just gone through with the larger VA audience in Sacramento. And so thank you so much, Jane and Steve, for giving me the opportunity. So a little bit about myself. I am a senior business analyst at VSP, and I am actually today's my 1 year anniversary, and so I'm excited about that too. I get to share my anniversary with you guys, and I get to do this with you. So super excited. And before I get started, what I want to do is I want to start my video. We can't meet in person, but I figure I put a face a name, it's better. While I'm presenting, you guys can see what I'm talking about. And I feel like I'm amongst friends right now, you guys. I see a lot of names that I recognize that I've worked with in the past, work with right now. And so I'm just so happy to be here with you. So without further ado, let's get started. Let me jump to my agenda. Give me a sec. All right, so today what I plan to go over is basically an overview of UAT, what I'm calling UAT 101. And then I want to talk about your role in UAT and what that all looks like. And then I want to talk about two of the main artifacts that come out of UAT, which is test plan and test case, and what the difference is between the two. And what I want to show you guys is basically a sample test plan and a sample test case, so you guys can kind of get an idea of how to connect everything that you guys are going to be basically consuming from me today. And then if we get a chance, I'll talk about the experience that I just briefly mentioned about UAT in real life and what we did at VSP within the team that I'm in. So my goal, hopefully, is that by the end of this presentation that you guys will have a better understanding of your role in UAT. You'll understand the differences between a test plan versus a test case, and you'll understand when you use them. And if you guys have any questions at all, feel free to put it up on the chat window. I will try to answer them as I go along. However, if I cannot get to them, I'll make sure that we
No, for me to pick.
answer your questions. And just a reminder, if you guys are not on mute, please put yourself on mute unless you have a really important question that you want to ask me with regards to the presentation. All right. All right, so moving on to the next slide. So let's start with UAT 101.
Maya, can you share a screen?
Yes, I'm sorry, did it stop sharing?
We're just seeing you.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Let me get it back up again. Give me a sec. You know when you guys see it.
All right, we see it.
All right, perfect. So I just went through that entire agenda without you guys even seeing that. I apologize for that, but real quick, this is what the agenda is. And so now we're going to jump into UAT 101. So as a BA, your journey typically starts where you go through discovery, where you're assigned to a project, and you go through discovery, and you try to figure out how big is this thing that you've been assigned. And once that's done, you go into business analysis planning and monitoring, and then you go into requirements elicitation, requirements management and communication, and then development support, and then eventually testing. And typically testing is the place where the business might turn and look at you to say, okay, now we have to do UAT. What do we do, Mai? Or what do we do, Steve? And you're probably wondering, if you've never been in UAT before, what the heck is UAT? If you are a seasoned VA and you've been involved in UAT already, I totally am not offended if you multitask and do other things, but I do hope that some of you guys get some nugget out of this and are able to apply it to any project that you're working on. And before I move forward, I want to stress that when I'm talking about testing, I'm only talking about testing from a project perspective, meaning that you've been assigned to a project that's typically medium to complex in nature. There's development involved. And so because there's development involved, there's also going to be testing that has to be done. I know that testing can be used in a very general way. If you're doing research or analysis sometimes you might be quote unquote testing to confirm some of the findings that you may have come across during your research and analysis. That is not the testing that I'm talking about. The testing that I'm purely focused on today is with regards to project work. So having said that, if you look on the far right of the picture, I also have a pit of despair because I don't know about you guys, but sometimes when I'm assigned to a project, even though I've been doing this for 20 years, sometimes you're just overwhelmed by the amount of information that you're trying to consume in. And when you're doing that, you tend to kind of digress and go to the pit of despair while you try to figure out what's going on before you make a U-turn and come back to your project journey. And so that happens to be quite often, even with like I said, the 20 years that I have. And if none of you guys have ever been to the pit of despair, and I am the only one, I truly think that you guys are probably the next candidate to maybe be speaking in the next IIBA event, because I would love to know how to avoid that. So having said that, our main focus is going to be towards the end of your journey around testing, UAT specifically. So with UAT, what I'm showing you guys here is called a V model diagram, or a validation and verification diagram. And it is typically found in software development. And it follows the software development lifecycle, along with the project management lifecycle. And so as you guys all know, typically when you're assigned to a project, it starts with ideation. Someone in the business decides that there needs to be a change to the system or to a process. And so they write up a business case for it along with justification. Typically, it's going to save us X amount of dollars or something. And then once that ideation comes to light, there's a feasibility that's done, and once it's approved, it goes into planning. And then this is typically when a VA gets involved, and you start to write your requirements. The developers get involved to do high-level design, and then to do detailed design, and then to implement. And in this case, in this V model, at the bottom there where you see implementation, that is not implementation into production. That is actually dropping code into a specific test environment to be further vetted. And so as you can see, this V model is really a cause and effect. And so the items on the left side, the requirements, the high-level design, and the detailed design, all cause something on the right side to happen. And so once all of those items on the left side happen, what typically takes place is unit testing. So unit testing is typically done by a developer, and it's them just testing their specific piece of code to ensure that they coded it correctly and it meets the expectations of the requirements. And then once they're done with detailed design and unit testing, you go into integration testing. Integration testing is typically testing across different systems, different platforms, to ensure that whatever change you implemented into the system didn't break something else. And so it's like that word says, it's a more high-level testing to ensure that everything is working as it should be cohesively. And so as you can see, there's different types of testing. Most of this testing, like I said, is either done by a developer or it's done by a software testing team. Our focus, of course, is that last orange block on the right, which is system and acceptance testing, or UAT. This is typically driven by the business or representatives of the business and goes hand in hand with requirements. And this is one of the reasons why requirements are so very important, and the quality requirements are so very important, because they do drive the outcome and the success of testing. And then once that is all done, from a project perspective, you just go into your typical, post-implementation validation, because typically there are times where you aren't able to test certain features and functions within the test environment. So you have to wait until it's implemented into production before you can test. And then there's also M&O, maintenance and operations. And then if there are feature changes or upgrades, you kind of go through the cycle again, where you go through a project. Eventually, if that system is outdated and new technology is introduced, you might go into a project where you retire or replace that system. And in all of that, UAT is still involved. All right, so that's kind of a high-level overview of what UAT is and where UAT falls within the project management lifecycle. And so what I want to talk to you about is your role. And the roles that I've identified here are basically different roles that I have personally been in the different organizations that I've been a part of. And so it just depends on your organization and where your organization is from a maturity perspective when it comes to testing. So before you can even start UAT, this is one of the key questions that you should probably be asking early on in the project. I am all about planning, and as a BA, you know that we anticipate a lot of things that happen in a project. And so these are one of the things that you definitely need to anticipate and plan for, so that you know how to do UAT before you get to the door of UAT. And so one of the questions you want to ask the PM is whether you're a consultant before UAT starts. And so when I'm talking about consultant, it basically means that you're just playing the role of guiding the UAT testers as needed, meaning the business is driving the entire UAT effort, and you're just available to answer any questions that they might have with regards to the requirements that were written or whatnot, but you're not heavily involved in testing. You might also play the role of oversight. And so basically what that means is that you're accountable for the testing activities. You provide direction, you remove obstacles, and you monitor the test progress of the testers. So that's what oversight is. And then you can also play the role of partial hands-on, meaning you partner with the business to do some of the testing, but the business typically drives and completes the testing. And so they're probably just going to assign you to the testing to execute. And then there's also full hands-on. Full hands-on is basically you're accountable and responsible for the entire test effort from beginning to end. And so these are some of the roles, like I said, that you can play in UAT. And so it's good to get that clarified up front so that you know how to plan for it. Because if you're just a consultant, there's not a lot of work on your end to do for UAT. But if you're full hands-on, there is definitely a lot of work to do, because now you have to think about strategy and approach and resources and coordinating and coming up with a communication plan so that you can communicate issues and track statuses with individuals. And so it's really key to plan that ahead. So with that being said, I want to jump into the some actual samples of a test plan and a test case. Depending on the organization, they might be used interchangeably. I personally heard them used interchangeably, where someone is saying that they have their test plan ready, and then I look at it, I'm like, oh, this isn't a test plan, it's actually a test case. The reason why I want to differentiate the two is because it's just not my word. From an industry perspective, there is a difference between the two, and they both serve different purposes, and they both address different audiences. And so it's important to know the two. So with regards to a test plan.
Hey, Maya.
Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second.
It seems that your audio is cutting out a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So we thought that it would be a better idea to turn the video off Maybe it might help bandwidth issues.
Yep.
If there's something going on.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me know.
Okay,
All right.
let's
So,
try that. Thank you.
yep, you're welcome. So with regards to the test plan, the intent of the test plan is to communicate. And what I mean by communicate is it's going to be at a high level so that folks who aren't on the technical side of the project will understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish with regards to your testing. It's a strategy, so it's going to be sharing your approach, your how you plan to execute your testing with your key audience. And typically your key audience in this case is going to be stakeholders, people from the business, leaders who have vested interest in the project. It's going to contain scope. And what I mean by scope is, as you guys are all aware from a systems perspective, every system is complicated, complex. And so what I always like to say is you're not trying to boil the ocean when it comes to testing. You have a limited amount of time and resource to do your testing. And so you really have to identify that scope so that you can accomplish your testing within that time. And this is one of the reasons why requirements are so important, because your requirements will drive that scope. I'm going to pause and see if you, is my audio better now that I turned off video?
Couple of folks are still finding it a little muffled, but yes, it is better.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's got something related to, you know, the way your laptop is positioned and the mic. I'm not sure. I know you're not wearing a headset. I am wearing a headset, so there could be a difference there, but I think we can move on.
Okay. I'll try to speak as close as possible to my mic. All right, so furthermore, with regards to the test plan, you want to also be able to identify your test environment. And I know in every organization, the test environment might look different. Some organizations might just be starting out on their testing capabilities, and so they don't have complex test environments available. And so you might just only have one test environment. There are other organizations that might have 20 test environments. And so identifying what test environment in advance you're going to be working in and coordinating that is going to be very key to the success of UAT. And the reason being is, unfortunately, there is never just one project happening at any organization. There are 30 to 100 projects happening at once. And I'm sure a handful of those projects are in testing at the same time as you are. And so ensuring that you're coordinating and you're communicating when you're going to be doing testing and finding that environment that is available is critical. And the other thing I mentioned again is the test plan is high level because your audience is more of the non-technical folks, more business oriented, who just wants to know that you have a plan in place and that you will be testing things that that will have an outcome that will basically drive the business to be successful. And it's a guide. And when I say that it's a guide, I had mentioned earlier on the pit of despair. Even in testing, I go into the pit of despair sometimes because, like I said, it can be overwhelming. And sometimes you're going down the rabbit hole trying to figure out if you've tested everything that you can. And so I used my test plan kind of like a compass to come back to so that if I feel like I'm digressing, I can go back and refocus on what it is that I should be accomplishing at that immediate moment in time. And so it is a tremendously helpful artifact from that perspective. A test plan contains risks as well. And so with any testing, there are definitely risks that are involved. For example, if resources aren't available or if the test environment that you wanted to test in isn't available, those are all risks that should be identified. And typically you should have a mitigation plan along with it as well. It contains objectives, meaning it should clearly state to your audience what you plan to accomplish by the end of your testing, whatever that testing may be. And same as strategy, it contains your approach. And then with that, so basically these are some of the typical components that would go into a test plan. And I'm hoping that this will make a lot more sense once I show you guys a sample of a test plan. So then what makes that different from a test case? A test case is a lot more technical. It is geared towards the tester or anyone that wants to review the quality of work of a tester. And so it is very step by step. It can be informal or it could be formal. And what I mean by that is if you're just on a very simple project, you don't need to have all the bells and whistles. It's probably just going to be 1 or 2 test cases. I don't think that it's necessary for it to be formal. It can, the test case can probably just be sent in an email to say, I'm going to be testing this, this, and this, and these are steps that I'm going to do, and that might be good for the audience or the team that you're sharing it with. Typically, it's formal when you're on a very complex project and you have, 20 or 30 test cases or even more. It's better for it to be formal because you will now have to track those test cases and track whether they passed or failed and the progress of each one. Test cases typically have preconditions. And preconditions basically mean that certain activities or certain features have to be set up or aligned before you can execute that first step in your test case. And I'll show you an example of that in the sample test case as well. Expected results, and so your test cases will have expected results, meaning if you are testing a specific feature, you expect that that feature is going to produce a particular outcome. And so that is documented as well. And requirements, I mentioned requirements before. Test cases are driven by the requirements. And so in order for you to have successful testing, the goal is to always start with successful or high quality requirements to begin with. Your testing is only as good as your requirements. And so if your requirements are vague or are not, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not singular in nature, it will be hard to test. And so your requirements definitely have to be of great quality in order for you to have a successful test. Test cases contain data, and this basically, it can be data that you either pull from production to do your testing, or it can be test data in the test environment that you plan to manipulate to get an expected result. And that all depends on your testing. The type of data depends on your testing and what it is that you're trying to do. And so there's no right or wrong way to grab your data. It just depends. Test cases can be either positive or negative. And what I mean by positive or negative is a positive test case is typically just testing your happy path, making sure that everything is going through the process the way you expect it to. A negative test case typically tests edits or errors, so you're intentionally making the system break or intentionally putting in bad data because you expect a certain error to be produced. So that would be a negative test case. And it contains a pass or fail indicator. And so even though you have expected results, sometimes those are the results that you expect don't happen. And so you have to indicate it as a fail. And so it's key for each step to have that pass or fail. All right, so let's see it in action. Give me a second while I pull up my Word document. So recently, my husband and I just purchased a home. We went through a builder, and so we had it all built and stuff. Waited a couple of months before we moved in, and I figured there's a lot of parallels with the home buying experience, the home building experience, and actually the building or the changing in the system. And so I thought that I would use my house as an example for a test plan and a test case. And so what I first started out with, like I said before, the most important thing to have is your requirements. And so what I did was I just created some basic requirements for my house. I started out with some assumptions. One, the water is provided to the home, the hot water heater is working, and the electricity is provided to the home. And typically, when you are buying a new home and it's being built, with our builder, they have what they call a celebratory walkthrough. And what a celebratory walkthrough is basically you get to walk through your home, ensure that everything is up to spec, meets your needs, and is based off of the specifications that the sales office gave you when at the time that you purchased your house. And so those specifications are basically equivalent to requirements in the VA world. And so these are some of the specifications I listed out. Very, very simple again for just the time constraint that we have. I know that it takes a lot more to build a house, but these are basically my 6 requirements. And so there's no right or wrong way to write requirements. The way I have it written right now is kind of in a user story format, but if your company does it differently, that's totally fine. The point is you have requirements. And so my first requirement is given that the windows are installed, when the homeowner wants to open or close a window can be opened or closed by the homeowner as needed. And then my next 2 requirements are related to faucets. And so given that the faucets are installed, the homeowner wants water, the homeowner is supplied water when he or she turns the faucet on. And then if the homeowner wants hot water, the homeowner is supplied hot water when she or he turns on the hot water handle. The 4th one, toilets. Toilets are important. So given that the toilets are installed, when the homeowner needs to flush the toilet, the homeowner can trigger a flush on the toilet. And then the last 2 are regarding switches. The lights, given that the light switches are installed, when the homeowner needs to turn the lights off or on, the homeowner can utilize a light switch to turn the lights off or on. And then number 6, given dimmer switches are installed, when the homeowner needs the lights to dim or undim, the homeowner can utilize the dimmer switch to dim or undim the light.
Mike,
Yes.
can you zoom in from the bottom right hand because the
Yes.
test case is too tiny
Yep.
for folks.
Is that better?
Yes, a little more might work even better actually.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. So these are my 5 requirements. I'm sorry, my 6 requirements that I'm going to base my test plan and my test cases on. So I've done all the requirements. We've gone through the whole journey. We're now at the end of testing. The developers have done their unit testing. The software testers have done their systems and integration testing, and now we're at UAT. And so I documented my test plan for UAT. And so typically with your test plan, and you can have way more components than what I have in here, but this is for simplicity's sake, you would typically have your project team listed, and of course I just listed the 3 folks, but you can have more than that. It's whoever you want to acknowledge that will be contributing to testing. And so you would have your project owner, In my example, the project owner will be Bob Foreman, because from a building perspective, building a house, typically the foreman is the project owner. They're overseeing the successful build of the house. And then the project owner and home builder, the home builder owns the design and the architect, and so we made them the project owner. And then in our case, the business analyst would be the homeowner, because the homeowner is actually doing the quote unquote UAT and walking through the house and ensuring that everything is functioning the way that it should be. For testing responsibilities, I put on the role of full hands-on for this one, and so I am responsible for the entire effort. Reference documents would be the floor plan and the home specifications that were given to me at the time of sale. And then the scope, of course, I'm not going to be testing every house in the neighborhood. I'm only going to be testing the home that's being sold to me. And so, of course, other homes are not in scope. The assumption is that water is provided to the home, hot water heater is working, and electricity is provided to the home. Constraints, like I mentioned there, when you do testing, there's definitely going to be constraints as you coordinate testing amongst other projects. And so for my house example, especially for the home builder that we went with, walkthroughs cannot be rescheduled. And so basically what they do is they schedule walkthroughs 2 months in advance. And if you cannot make that walkthrough, you cannot make that walkthrough, and you're basically getting the keys to your house without really validating that everything works the way that you wanted it to work. Same goes for UAT. Sometimes because UAT is towards the end of a project, your window is the one that gets compromised the most because of all of the upstream activities that have been done. And so sometimes your window might go, you were planning to have 2 weeks of UAT, and then your window might be 2 days instead. And so understanding and documenting those constraints are important so that you understand the reason why you tested the amount that you tested. Risks are also important. And so for me, the risks that I called out were weather conditions. If it's raining outside, I won't be able to walk around the perimeter of the house to ensure that there's nothing leaking or there's no holes on the exterior of the house. Home availability, although this walkthrough is scheduled 2 months in advance, depending on the work that's being done, sometimes a home might not be available at that time. And so that is definitely a risk. And resource availability. I know in our situation, a lot of the painters were let go, and so they didn't have time. They didn't have enough time to finish painting everything that they could. And so when we did the walkthrough, we noticed that there were some beams that weren't painted and things like that. And so from a systems perspective, there definitely can be resource challenges where you were hoping to have 5 testers, but because there was a production issue, the business can now only give you 2 testers. Things like that can come up as well. And so identifying those risks and again putting a mitigation plan together is definitely going to help you be successful in your UAT. And then I also have a section for test environment and tools. For my home example, my test environment is where the home is located. For a typical BA, this would be identifying where you anticipate planning to do your testing, whether it's in test environment A, B, or C, and then the different types of tools that you will be using in order to conduct your testing. My test strategy for this is that I'm going to arrive at least 15 minutes early to ensure there's ample time to complete the walkthrough. And my test is going to be based, again, on the acceptance criteria or the requirements. I don't ever want to lose sight of that because if we lose sight of the requirements, then that is where we lose sight of scope, and we might start to test things that are not necessary. Or we might test things that don't need to be tested, basically. And so always keeping an eye on those requirements and making sure that you're testing against those requirements are so important. And I'm going to continue to emphasize that as I speak. Also, prioritizing testing to ensure that critical requirements are tested first. That's always important. If you are on a complex project and you have hundreds of requirements to test, different functions and features to test, it's important to prioritize what are those key features that you want to test that's going to have the biggest impact when you go live. So that's critical. And then also acknowledging that that your testing is going to be signed and published. In our case, once we did our walkthrough of our house, we actually did have to sign a paper to say, yep, we checked everything and everything looks great. We did find some issues, and those issues were going to be resolved before we moved in. So that definitely does happen in UAT, where you will potentially find issues that maybe the software testers didn't find during their testing. And so you will have to escalate those to development. And then some other things that I want to highlight, there may be test automation. And if it's leveraged for UAT, which is very, very rare, typically test automation happens during QA, and then you should probably call that out. And what test automation is basically regression testing, meaning there are normal repetitive processes that take place within the system, and because they're repetitive, there's a way to automate it, and that automation is triggered and those processes are validated to ensure that they didn't break with this new change. And then the other item that I want to highlight is that there's typically test data, and so make sure you explain how you prepare and configure your test data. I mentioned before that your test data can come from production, and so if you're pulling test data from production into your test environment, make sure that you call that out. If you're going to be manipulating test data in order to get the expected results that you want, call that out as well, so that folks know where you're getting your data from. And this is very important, especially from a development perspective, because if you come across any issues during testing, the developers will want to know what type of data you were using to help them determine root cause. And lastly, something that I think about, I always think about upstream and downstream and how the work that I do impacts folks. And so I know in past experiences, my test cases have been used by the trainers in order for them to document for training purposes. And the reason for that is it contains a lot of step-by-step information that's really helpful for them. And it contains screenshots that are helpful to share with folks that will directly be using the system. And so always think about your downstream partners and think about how your documentation is going to help them, because the project doesn't end with you. There are always going to be downstream. So with my test plan now done, I'm going to focus on my test case. And so before I jump into my test case, I want to say there's no right or wrong way to write a test case. It does not have to be in a Word document. It does not have to be in Excel. It's your preference, and it's the preference of your organization. If you guys have something set in place where your organization says use Excel and that's all you guys are going to use, great. Use that and run with it. I do mine preferably in Word, only because Word allows me more flexibility to format and to add screenshots. And so I only have one test case, as you can see, but of course you can have many test cases, and the way you build out your test case is totally up to you and totally up to the requirements you have. If you have a lot of requirements that have maybe the same functionalities or features, you might want to lump them together in a test case. If you want to break out those features into multiple test cases, that's totally fine. Again, the whole intent is to ensure that you tested all of your requirements thoroughly. And so it doesn't matter, how many test cases you need to do that. And so with my first test case, I basically the key components that I have in my test case is I have an identifier, and so it's just test case 1, and it can be test case 1 through N. It doesn't matter how many test cases you have. And the reason why I do that is if there are any issues, or if I'm on a complex project where I do have hundreds of test cases, and you come up with an issue, it's easier to communicate the test case number to the developers than to say, oh, it's to give them a file name. So so it's key to identify, uniquely identify your test case. I also identify the author and the tester. And the reason for that is sometimes the author might not be the tester. And so it's key to identify that, especially if you are not fully hands-on and you are just partially hands-on in UAT, and the business has authored the test case and you're testing it. It's important to have that information, 1, so that you can go back to the author if you have any clarifying questions. And then 2, so that, again, if there's any issues, the developers know who to go to. And then the test date. The test date is very important because if you are in a test environment, things change. A test environment is very volatile. And the reason why it's very volatile is because developers are dropping code in there, a lot to support the various projects. And so if a developer has dropped their code in on one day, and then the next day they're working on something else, and they drop in new code, that new code might have affected your work. And so it's important to know the date so that the developers, if you guys come across a bug or an issue, the developers can go back and look at their code to see if there were any changes made during that point in time. And so with that being said, moving forward, I also provide a brief overview of the purpose of this test case. And so this test case is going to verify that light switches are functioning as expected. And I'm going to include dimmer switches in this because I lumped switches together. And again, like I said, it's up to you. You can separate it if you don't want dimmer switches in here into a different test case. And so my goal is to validate that those light switches turn off and on, and I'm going to validate that dimmer switches can dim. The first scenario, and I only have one scenario in here, but typically you would have another scenario for the dimmer switches, but for simplicity's sake, I only put one scenario in here, just so that you can kind of see how the format is laid out. And I'm going to validate that the light switches turn off and on. And so here's my precondition. For our builder, typically when you do your walkthrough, they intentionally turn on all of the lights. So when you walk into the house, all the lights are already on. And so the precondition in this case is before I can even start on step 1, my precondition is that all the lights are turned on. From a BA perspective, in your case, it could be something as simple as I have, my internet browser open to the logon page of the system that I plan to test. That could be a precondition. So for step 1, I have a reference to my requirement, and so I'm specifically testing requirement number 5. My description, so a description of my test. So in this case, the homeowner will be able to utilize a light switch to turn the light off. And then my expected result. I expect that the light switch turns the light off. And then my second step is, again, referencing the requirement. The homeowner will be able to utilize a light switch to turn the light on. So I validated, my first step validated that I can turn it off. Now let's validate that the lights still turn back on when I want them to. And then of course you have a notes and an issues column and then a pass or a fail. If for some reason one of these doesn't work and as expected and you have a quote unquote bug, I would typically identify it on here and then escalate it to the developers to triage. Or in this case, with regards to our house, escalated it to our home builder to triage. And then some things that I want to highlight. Screenshots are important. And so for the house example, maybe I would take a picture of the light off and the light on to show that they did work in case something happened in the future. And I need to have the builder come back out to fix something. And that happens, I know from a systems perspective as well, depending on organizations, there is a warranty period. once something goes live in production. And so ensuring that everything is captured and that you have screenshots is helpful during that warranty period as well, to show them, hey, it was working during tests. We have proof of it, and so we don't know why it's working now, or things like that. And then again, calling out your test environments and your test cases is important. Again, if you find bugs or any issues, it's helpful for the developers to take a look at your test cases and take a look at which test environment you are working in order to resolve that bug. So that is a pretty simple walkthrough of test plan and a test case. What I wanted to do before we go on to the next slide was give you just a brief experience of what we did in our team. Our team, about 2 months ago, they basically saw the same slide deck that you guys saw, a little bit modified for proprietary reasons. And we basically divided the team into groups of 2. And what we did was we handed them some requirements, and we pulled really simple user stories that we knew that they would be able to write requirements for. And we taught them what a test plan was, and we taught them what a test case was. And we basically told them to go take a look at the requirements and come back and share with us what your test plan, your test case is. And it was an amazing experience. I don't know if any of the folks are on the call, but what ended up happening was, even though they didn't write the requirements, because the requirements were written with such great quality, they were able to go and write their test plans and write their test cases, and not only share it with us, but share how they learned something new about the system that they weren't aware of because they went through that experience. And they also wrote test plans and test cases that I didn't even think of when I was reviewing those user stories to begin with. And so although I used my house building experiences as an example, this is definitely something that is truly applicable from a work perspective. And we saw that done successfully just 2 months ago. So with that being said, I don't want you to take my word for it. There are many resources out there that talk about the differences between a test case and a test plan, and what user acceptance testing is all about. And so I put some links out there for you guys to take a look at, so that you have a better understanding of the two and when to use them. So we are about on time and on track, and so I just wanted to thank you guys for the opportunity for letting me share. And I don't know if there's any questions on the chat. I haven't been checking, and so let me go right now to see. It's probably a great time for me to take any questions that you guys might have.
Hi, I have a question.
Yeah.
My question is, can the system test cases can be used for UAT? If yes, what's the pros and cons of using the system test cases for UAT?
So I think system test cases can be used for UAT, but it needs to be modified so it's not technical, because system test cases tend to be more technical, whereas UAT tends to be more business oriented. And so you can leverage those test cases, but I would modify them to be more business oriented.
Thank you.
So I have a question here. So how do you handle the non-functional requirements? How is it tested?
So typically, from a UAT perspective, non-functional requirements are out of scope. Non-functional requirements should be tested during system testing.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If anyone is having trouble getting off of mute, you could type a question into the chat window or just jump in. So I'll wait 10 more seconds, and if I don't hear any questions or see them in the chat window, we'll start closing out.
I do want to call out that because someone had mentioned about system testing, it's very important as a BA to partner with your QA resources during this time because while they're doing their system testing, it's good to be kind of kept in the loop so that when they are done with system testing, they can share that information with you and perhaps give you pointers on what to look out for during the
Thanks, Mai. Okay, we're going to close out the session now. Thank you all for attending, and Mai especially, thank you for the time and effort that I'm sure it took a lot of time and effort to put together these great slides with great content. You used some practical examples that were easy to understand. You also talked about some of your real life experiences, and to me, sometimes that's the best thing than just to hear sort of like a canned presentation, you know, on a certain topic. It's really good to have someone who's kind of lived through it. The slides will be posted as long as you can share them. We'll post them out to our IIBA Sac Valley website. I know you showed a couple of templates. If you're able to share those too, that would be great. We could put those out there too.
Yep,
And
we have all those to Bob and Steve, so you guys can definitely feel free to share those.
excellent. And just a reminder to everybody, our next session is going to be next month, June 17th, on user story evolution. It's a noontime webinar, 1 hour. Should be pretty good. And be looking for, we'll probably start promoting that in another week or so, maybe 2 weeks. So be looking for that. And I want to thank everybody, and Tarab, especially you, for all kind of working out all these little technical things in between. But to thank everybody, and have a good night.